welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldai, your host and CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are dedicating this month to the theme of space. And we are so thankful for all of our sponsors for supporting the show. Airspace Links, Fever Aero, Drone Responders, TerraSoft, and ASTN Group. We have some incredible topics that we'll be talking about today. Sit tight. Future of satellites. We're going to talk about the Odysseus moonlander and what happened there. The Russians are putting nuclear weapons up in space, or so we believe. And then we're going to end the show on ground software as a service and talk about what that is. Now, to talk about all these great topics, we have incredible guests. So we're going to go around the horn and we're going to go in alphabetical order, as is our tradition. So Brad, over to you to give your little introduction tell everybody who you are. And we might have some audio issues with Brad, possibly. So Jerry, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
All right, go ahead and do your intro, please.
Sure. My name is Jerry Hancock. I work for Viasat. I'm currently the Director for Aviation Safety Solutions and Cybersecurity.
All right. Well, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much, Jerry. Michelle.
Hey, everybody. Michelle Hanlon. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi, and a space lawyer that loves everything space.
Absolutely. So great to have you, too. And Brad, are you able to unmute? I am not sure if he can hear us. So Brad, over to you. We've got Brad Bode from Freedom Space, and not sure what's going on with his mic right now, but
I can hear you, but I'm getting double audio. So.
Oh, okay, very weird. Well, we're not getting double audio from you, so go ahead and fire away.
I will do my best. Yeah, my name is Brad Bode from Atlas Space Operations and Freedom Space.
All right. Well, great to have you. And I met Brad through some of his teammates. Dennis Cater is a Colorado guy, and he's very active in the local business community. So that's where I met Brad. So great to have you on the show. All right. Without further ado, let's go ahead and roll with the first article, which is Jerry's. The future of satellites. So Jerry, so we see the article here. Tell us a little bit about why you picked it and what this article says.
Yeah, so their article was written by a gentleman named Kerry Richardson. I don't personally know the guy, but I thought it was an interesting article because although there's some key points in there that I probably don't fully agree with, I think it was a good article from a broad perspective that talks about where the satellite industry is kind of going in the future, more importantly, where it needs to go, some changes that I think that would help out from an international perspective, and then also, some key things that I think might be missing there is, but it kind of hits on gaps in industry where I think satellite will definitely play a strong part in the future. So I thought it was a pretty good article from that perspective.
Well, absolutely, Jerry, and we're going to go to Brad here in a second, but I don't know that people fully appreciate how space permeates everything we do. When you talk about satellites, we're talking about how they're transforming communication, meteorology, astronomy, navigation, Earth observation, just to name a few. Of course, none of us can live without GPS, which is a constellation of satellites. Satellites are so critically important, and this article kind of rolls through some of the challenges, some future scenarios, and things of that nature. But Brad, this is a world that you live in on a daily basis, so I'd love to hear your perspective on this article and where you think the future of satellites is going.
I think it's really important to consider in the broader sense where it's headed, because this industry is so complicated and requires so many different elements to even, tech stacks to even close the link to space. So I think really we have to move towards connecting to space being more like connecting to your cell service, in that sense that it works, it's seamless. You don't really have to know exactly how the data gets from point A to point B. It might be direct to Earth, antennas speaking directly to Earth from the satellite. It might be crosslinks. It might be direct to Earth with optical. And there's many different ways the data could get down, and it could be require that it be delay tolerant. So there's the hybrid space approach, which is all the talk within the government right now as to how we're going to get to a hybrid space architecture, in the sense that customers can be completely unaware of the movements and the details of how your data gets to the ground. And it's a very difficult problem because of all of the complexity in doing that.
Well, with any technology, there's always challenges. And I imagine, Michelle, that's your world when you think about the legal regimes that apply here, not to mention the physical and other threats that can emanate from this particular space. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Absolutely. I mean, satellites, as you said, we cannot overstate our dependence on the satellites that orbit our Earth. Unfortunately, our dependence is growing, which means the number of satellites is growing, and they're getting smaller and they're growing even more. So we have two issues that we're looking at from a regulatory standpoint. Well, three actually. One is we're blocking astronomy, right? And so, how do we balance the ability to see, potentially dangerous asteroids against the need to get internet to rural communities? We have the issue of orbital debris. There are about 9,000 satellites up there, and only about there's 5,000 Starlink satellites up there, but other than that, only about 3,000 operational satellites. And the rest is just a bunch of junk floating around. And on top of that, to compound sort of that, we're finally getting to the point where the international community is recognizing, oh, we have to clean up our orbit or else it's going to be hard for us to launch stuff. We're realizing when we deorbit things, we're doing things to our atmosphere as well. And so we really have to start thinking less of, just sort of use and exploit, and think about how we can use without exploiting so much. And so we've seen in the past couple of weeks, ideas for wooden satellites, which wouldn't perhaps not contaminate the atmosphere when they burn up. I think there's companies that want to recycle everything in space, which I think is a brilliant idea, right? I mean, that's certainly what my children learned in school: reduce it, reuse it, recycle it. And so I think we're really at a point where we're learning that we have so many capabilities that we can get from space, but we have to start to be a little bit more responsible about how we access those.
Yeah, you mentioned this orbital debris, floating around. I mean, this stuff is flying around at like 700,000 miles per hour, and like a pea-sized piece of debris can blow a hole in the International Space Station. I mean, this is significant, So we're going to be talking about some of these other threats, but Jerry, since this is your article, I'd love for you to kind of bring this home for us and wrap it up, and then we'll transition to our second article.
Yeah. So for me, I think all the points here made are really good. I think that, if I look at, the different perspectives here, things that are happening from the industry as a whole, where it relates to satellite space, your parking space out in space, the debris and stuff like that. You're absolutely right. I think these are issues that, there's a bigger problem that's globally, that has to be globally addressed, right? It's really an international issue. And it's, like anything else, it's hard to get governments to prioritize something that they can't put tangibility to, right? And so trying to get them to do that. But I can tell you, those that are in the space industry, those who are launching satellites, those who are building satellites, or operators of satellites, they're very well aware of this. And I think it's really going to take one of those things from an international perspective, that people are going to have to drive something at that level. When it comes to complexity, communication solutions and stuff like that, Brad, I think you're absolutely right in the aspect of, it is a changing paradigm. And I can tell you, for a fact, those in the industry today are trying to get to the point where we can make this seamless. We want to make this seamless. One of the markets I'm heavily involved with, and so is Don, is the drone industry. And, a lot of people have found out, over the past few years, they went from thinking that they could, implement drones and do everything by LTE. And what they're finding out is, well, LTE is not everywhere. So what are they using to augment that is space. And so to create these seamless solutions that are always on, that allow people to traverse, and I'll use an aviation term. It's like free flight, right? Being able to go directly to point A to point B versus, through navigation points. It's the only way that's going to make this happen. I don't think a lot of people really realize how much, space drives the farming industry, right? A lot of these farmers, big farmers and stuff like that, this is how they're driving their tractors. This is how they're doing all their aggregation, all that other stuff. Maritime, it's been, heavily used in maritime for quite some time. Aviation, it's been used in aircraft, and now it's going to, new industries and stuff like that, whether it's air mobility and taxis or, all that other stuff. And then you take the other aspect of things where now we've got people that are now integrating satellites into phones. So if you're at a place where it's not there and you have an emergency, well, you should be able to get a satellite signal and at least be able to make an emergency call and stuff like that. So it is growing. It's growing at a rapid pace. And anymore, I don't think technology is no longer the issue. I think technology is rapidly evolving, right? And it's trying to go at a pace that can be introduced to everybody and be accepted. But I think where some of the key points in this article are key is there are some things that we do need to put some regulations around it, maybe some kind of standardize on some things, but there's some things I think everybody wants to have their secret sauce for as far as what makes them special, not special. But some of these international rules on how we manage, how we operate it, there's some key things here. And I think I can tell you the military drives a lot of that when we deal with the different governments. We deal with, we're a global company. So for us, we have to deal with multiple governments, and some are more concerned than others. And well, some of them just because of nationality, they don't even want to, they want to have a whole separate fleet and a whole separate operation. So there's definitely some key things here that could improve it. And so hopefully as things evolve, I think there's going to be certain industries that we have that are going to force change across industry as a whole. That's kind of what we're seeing from our side.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Jerry, if you would agree. It's almost like another parallel to the drone industry is, it's not just Elon building satellites, right? It's like middle schoolers in classrooms are building these things and launching them too. So when you think about, kind of the ubiquitous nature of these and how it's just going to keep growing, as STEM programs increase, as private companies partner with the government or just do it on their own. I think we're just going to continue seeing a rapid growth across space.
Yeah, I absolutely agree for that. And I think part of it is the availability of technology, right? So it used to be technology was expensive. It was hard to find, hard to get your hands on. Nowadays, like if I quit into cybersecurity, you've got a lot of people that are just putting different hacks out there and anybody can pick it up, and you don't have to have a high level of sophistication. The technology is easily accessible, easily available. Same thing with satellites, right? You slap a few Raspberry Pis together, some solar panels, and some other key aspects, and you're not too far from building your own satellite, quite frankly.
That's unbelievable. So I want to transition now to Michelle's article about vehicles that we need to navigate through this space with all these satellites and get up to the moon. And we recently had, I think just within the last week, this Odysseus vehicle that journeyed up to the moon. So tell us about this article and why you picked it.
Absolutely, Don. I mean, holy cow, this is amazing. We have a private company landing on the moon, and certainly the space community was sort of in a state of pause when we were watching this lander. As viewers may know, it did land successfully on the moon, but it tipped over, and so it brings up so many questions of like, wow, we put humans on the moon 50 years ago. Why is it so hard to put a robot on the moon now? And when you think about it, you think about two things. First is that when we put humans on the moon, we had 2% of the GDP going towards that project. We had, 400,000 people across the United States, not to mention foreign partners, working just on that. Let's get humans to the moon. And so it was really expensive and it was really cool, but they were short trips too, right? The first trip was only 2 hours of outside time. And so we're looking at trying to transition from sort of, hey, look, we made it, let's plant the flag and yay us, to let's build an economy. Let's build a human future in space. Let's build a human community in space. And the first step is to start making it very routine to go to the moon and back. And so with the Intuitive Machines was actually the fourth private company to try and reach the moon. So fourth time's a charm in this case. It was first an Israeli company and then a Japanese company. And then in January, February, it was another American company, Astrobotic. And this Intuitive Machines was the first one to make a soft landing. So this is an incredible breakthrough. You know, I call it, again, I use the word you can't overestimate a lot when I talk about space, because we're in this cusp of everything changing, everything with respect to how we live. Even if you could care less about the fact that we landed a robot on the moon, it is going to affect your future. And so the other thing that I really love about this story is that this is a small company. You know, this isn't a large government. This is Intuitive Machines is not a huge company. It's publicly traded. You can go own a piece of the company that made it to the moon. So it's not just countries doing this, and it's not just the billionaires, Bezos and Musk. Real people are reaching the moon with plans to do some real mining and create a real economy. And I just think, I mean, you know, I pinch myself. I'm so happy to be alive.
Well, I mean, you know, full transparency, Intuitive Machines got 118 million from NASA to do this mission, right? So, you know, and we see this not just in the space, you know, space arena, where the government, whether it's NASA or in the aviation sector, the FAA, or in the military side, the DoD, is funding this kind of, you know, innovation and creativity for smaller companies, but absolutely exciting that this happened. You know, I guess my question, and I'm going to throw this out to the group. I'm going to go a little bit off script. You know, for the first time I heard about a lunar economy, because this is not the area that I work in every single day, was at last year's Space Symposium. And I would think for Joe Q public out there, people are wondering, why do we care? In other words, why is a lunar economy important? Why is it important to colonize the moon or get people to the moon? I don't know that the public is fully aware of that. Whereas, you know, Michelle, you said the last time we landed people on the moon, there was a ton of money behind it, right? 2% of the GDP. But also, like, every American was sitting behind a television watching that. Like, they can't, right? So for this one, I feel like people like you and other space aficionados are super excited about it, and the rest of the public doesn't know about it, or if they do, they don't appreciate why this is important. So I'd love to hear somebody's perspective on why this lunar economy, or why these kind of missions, is critical to our future. Brad?
Sure. Well, I think there's two appeals here. One appeal is to the emotional sort of visionary aspect of it, is that, you know, we want to go beyond Earth to both keep humanity thriving, because as some believe that, you know, we will eventually deplete the resources that are here on Earth. And if you take the Elon Musk approach, it's imminent doom, right? And I think that just being able to stretch beyond Earth and be interplanetary, or even to get as far as the moon, is one step towards being able to go to Mars or extend life out into the universe more. Personally, I think it'll be more machines that extend life out into the universe, because we're just not meant for space travel for long duration. But that vision of achieving something so difficult, I think, is hope for people and humanity. It sits in your gut and says, man, we can do it. Look what we did as a race. And it brings people together and countries together. I mean, look like International Space Station. It's international for a reason. And if we can collaborate on that, we can put aside our differences. And I think that's the visionary aspect of it. And I think from a science perspective, there's a lot you can learn about communication that far out, all the way to the moon. How do we make it work seamlessly? That will help with terrestrial communication. Science experiments done on the moon in a lab under less gravity, or even on space stations where there's zero gravity. The idea of being able to sustain life in such a harsh environment, all of that information can come back to Earth and apply to things that might help us solve problems on Earth. I mean, didn't the internet come out of DARPA? And plastic came out of NASA. I think plastic came out of NASA. Well, maybe we could argue that plastic isn't necessarily the best thing to happen, but these technologies come out of these enormous efforts that do change the shape of humanity.
All right. Wow. That very inspirational. Jerry, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this moon lander, and whether you want to include this or not. I'm really curious, to Michelle's comment, why we can land people on the moon like 50 years ago, but we can't get our little robot to land like, without falling over, 50 years later. But anything you want to say about this article would be appreciated.
Yeah, no, I like, Brad's perspective. That certainly provides a perspective, but I think fundamentally, I think most people don't appreciate it because it's not tangible to them, right? I think a lot of people is probably more emotional as tangible, but to me, you can say a lot about Elon Musk and SpaceX, but I give them a lot of credit for what they're doing, because instead of taking the same script, if I look at Blue Origin and some of the others where they kind of took an old design and try and make it new, they took something and said, look, we're going to start from a clean piece of paper and we're going to figure out how to actually make this work and grow it. And I'm going to work, I'm going to develop the whole model and how I manufacture it and stuff like that. To me, this is what is it? I think there's some sort of Apple TV shows like For Mankind or something like that. I think it's probably very applicable here in this particular aspect, because it's all about commercialization as well, right? Once you can start to get that commercial venture and you can start making it routine, as Michelle has said, well, then you've got commerce coming out of this, right? And once people start to look at that, they're looking at it today. It's like, well, that's so unachievable unless I'm Elon, excuse me, Elon Musk or somebody else who's got the significant wealth. If we can start making it to a point where it's routine and the average person can start to do some of these kinds of things, and it produces commerce, then I think you're going to find that it will be something that people will start to appreciate, will start to look at and say, okay, wait a minute, this is real. This isn't fantasy land. I can actually do something. I can make it a part of life. And it's going to create another revenue, and I think it should be a global revenue at that point.
Yeah, I don't know if part of this is just a PR problem, and maybe it, like, again, to your point, Michelle, maybe it's just about the money, because we're just not throwing, Congress is not funding NASA to the level that they used to be funded. They're actually cutting some STEM programs, I believe, which is super sad to me. But that PR piece of getting the word out of why this is a big deal, why people should be excited about it, I just feel like is missing. But Michelle, back over to you to kind of wrap up this particular article and what you might hope to see in the future.
So I really appreciate the responses, because you're right, it is a PR problem. And I spent a lot of my time sort of scribbling down answers to why. And so the more I get, the better, right? And I love this, this gut, like, wow, this is just really cool. I always see it as we have no idea what will come from space travel, right? We had no idea what would happen when we shot when we took the V2 rocket and put a camera on it. We were like, oh wow! So because of space, we understand that our climate is changing. Because of space, we're starting to see how we can help our planet. I mean, one of the biggest things that I like to tell people is, look, the idea is to move heavy industry off of Earth. Let's get all of our server farms onto the moon where there's no life that we have to worry about. Let's try and return our Earth to its pristine pre-industrial position. Yes, are those rose-tinted glasses? Are those pipe dreams? We have no idea what once we get to the moon, what we might discover, what's in the regolith, what can we make on the moon? What if when we start on the moon, I would love to visit the moon. I don't think I really want to raise a family on the moon. I mean, it's pretty stark and, harsh. And, I kind of liked sending my boys outside for hours at a time. But we're going to the moon to learn how to get beyond the moon. The universe is huge. We're this little piece of it, and it's all around us. And so, I like to tell people, look, this isn't going to outer space. We're in space already. We're a part of space. We're a part of the cosmos. This is like being in our house and looking outside at this beautiful backyard with all these resources and saying, oh no, I don't want to go outside. I'm not going to go there because it's too hard. I'm not going to go there because it's too cold. That is not what the human spirit is about. And I believe that in order to thrive, we need to continue to challenge ourselves. And that means, yes, challenging ourselves to fix our planet. But I think we're going to find the answers on how to fix our planet out in space. So to me, going to space is this wonderful sort of, I mean, you can't possibly know what is going to come of our exploration. When Christopher Columbus landed on North America, who knew that this country would be created, that the largest democracy in the entire world, that it would produce Elvis Presley and McDonald's and baseball? Who knew back in the 1400s? Nobody could have predicted that. And that's where we are right now on this incredible threshold. We cannot predict the future, but we can just embrace it.
Well, very inspirational right there. I'm laughing in my own head. I just saw a movie about Elvis, and I'm like, I love Elvis, but that Priscilla movie really paints him in interesting light. So I commend it to your attention. Absolutely, we don't know what's out there. I think in the big picture of things, it's not just a PR problem. I think other world events are obviously overshadowing some of the really great news stories that we're seeing out there as well. And we're going to get to that in a second. So thank you very much for that, Michelle. And we also want to take this minute to thank our sponsors. That was a wonderful summary, inspiring according to Henna Katz out there. Thank you, Henna, for that comment. And thank you also to our sponsors. Once again, Airspace Link, Speedbird Aero, Drone Responders, Caresoft, and ASTN Group. That's a wide group of companies from AI to IT resellers to public safety, nonprofit, drone delivery, and air and ground risk companies. So really cool stuff, great entrepreneurial spirits in all of them. All right, so next article's mine. And, I'm sorry, guys, I had to go a little dark here because, when I see amazing technology, I also think to myself, what's the downside here? And we know how vulnerable these satellites are already. Getting to Jerry's initial article and the future of satellites, we know that today that satellites are getting jammed, they're getting spoofed, and the resilience of, for example, our GPS constellation and the brother and sister constellations out there that are providing that position, navigation, and timing that is so critical to all of the functions of our daily lives is really at risk. And then you see this, and we're seeing what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. We know that the Russians messed with Starlink. When Elon had decided to initially give it to the Ukrainians, it became a dual-use technology at that point. And for those that don't know what that is, that's a technology that can be used both for military and civil purposes, and so the Russians started messing with that. But what we're seeing now is some intelligence coming out that the Russians are looking to put a nuclear weapon in space. To detonate this thing would create an EMP, an electric magnetic pulse, that would basically just make everything in a pretty wide swath of an area go completely dark. Now, Michelle, of all the people on this call, knows very well about international law and customary international law, the law of armed conflict. And, doing something like that, it violates the principle of discrimination. And ironically, would also take out Russia's own satellites as well, because there's no controlling it once something like this happens. And so, there's a lot of speculation out there, like they would never pull that trigger. If they did this is just, sensationalism. I'd love to hear what everybody's thoughts are on this. I mean, when you think about the nuclear race, taking that to space takes it just literally to a whole new level. And, so that's what this article is about. When this big reveal happened, it was, by the way, another example of highly classified intelligence that somehow got leaked into the mainstream media. That's all we know. Once it got leaked, there was an acknowledgement, and then pretty much we haven't heard much about that ever since. And this was about a week or two ago that this article came out. But let's go in order. Brad, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, well, setting the stage here, I think earlier we were talking about how not as much money is going to NASA, et cetera. Well, I would argue that we're on the cusp where an enormous and more money than ever will be going towards space. And this is exactly the reason, because Space Force was started, 5 years ago? I don't know, 6. And this just the beginning. It's in human nature to extend conflict to wherever we can, unfortunately. And so that area will be space. I think that the main issue is more negotiation between countries. I don't think Russia wants to do that, but they want to have the threat, just like other countries want to have the threat of nuclear capability, because there's 6 nuclear capable countries in the world. And it's a way to have stalemate, to say that right. I saw the look, Jerry, maybe there's more, but I think 6 acknowledged nuclear countries in the world. We need to have negotiation between countries early and often as it relates to space to really help stay ahead of this problem. I don't think anybody wants to do that, because once you open that can of worms, all the satellites can go away rather rapidly. I mean, we're all going to race towards having that same capability. And I'll mention an article that just came out recently, and it relates to this. It's we executed on a mission called Victus Nox, and that was a rapid response mission. That rapid response mission basically set a clock and said the government Space Systems Command would ask you, get ready to launch the satellite, communicate with it, and have it working in the next 24 hours. So we partnered with Millennium Space Systems, a Boeing company, and that was executed. It launched. We communicated. We provided the ground, and it just goes to show that the government is thinking ahead about this problem. If a satellite is removed or in some way damaged, how quickly can we respond to that threat and that issue and get our systems back online? So it is in the zeitgeist. It is something we have to worry about. I leave it to the experts about space law and how we deal with it on an international basis. But from a technology perspective, we're certainly trying to solve that problem, be prepared for that space warfare future, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have to design something with like MRAP type resiliency from a hardware physical standpoint, because when that EMP goes off, all those satellites don't just go dark. Some of them blow to bits, and that just increases that space junk, right? So launching something else into that environment, I think, becomes even more challenging, not just the timing issue, but again, what's that looking like? But that's a great segue, Michelle, to go over to you, because I was actually just at Duke Law School, their Center for Law, Ethics, and National Security this past weekend. Great panel on space, talking about customary international law and how under the Outer Space Treaty that it does apply in outer space. But when you hear something like this, what alarm bells go off in your mind from kind of a legal standpoint?
So this is a real head scratcher, Don. The Outer Space Treaty prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction anywhere in space. So there's a huge gaping hole there. You can put conventional weapons in space. It's perfectly legal. So why is Russia all of a sudden saying, we're going to put nuclear weapons in space? This is a direct provocation, a direct sort of poke at the Outer Space Treaty. And I point to, recent history. In 2021, they conducted an ASAT test. Now, why did they conduct an ASAT test? Everyone in the world knows they have ASAT capabilities. conducting the
And
test
that's
created.
anti-satellite, Michelle. That's
Sorry,
anti-satellite.
anti-satellite test. Yep,
Okay.
they shot down
All
one
right.
of their own satellites. Everyone in the world knew they had this capability, but they did it anyway, and they created a debris field that actually endangered their own cosmonauts on space station. And what did we
Wow.
see happen? 2 months later, they invaded Ukraine. So, Russia is signaling to the world that it doesn't care about the treaty. It doesn't care about debris. It's sort of showing it's almost like a just dare us kind of mentality, which is incredibly dangerous because we know they don't really care about international law. It was illegal for them to invade Ukraine, and what can we do about it? This is, a lot of my students sort of get very vexed because there's no real enforcement provisions under public international law, and people fail to recognize, that just being wrong sometimes it helps. So I see this really as um, this is not the end of the Outer Space Treaty. This is not the beginning of war in space. This is a provocation by an individual, and it is a direct result of what's happening terrestrially. And when we look at the impact of what this proposed weapon could do, there's no way that Russia keeps any friends, right? I mean, this isn't going to somehow magically, protect Chinese satellites or the Chinese space station. This is, China complained, funnily enough, or ironically, around the same time that Russia conducted this ASAT test. China complained using the Outer Space Treaty, Article 5, which states that you have an obligation to tell the world when there's a phenomena in space that is dangerous to humans. And so China sent a a note verbal, it's called a very formal note to the United Nations, and said, there is a phenomena in space that is a danger to humans. That was Starlink. They were complaining about Starlink. Okay, so if you're going to complain about two satellites where your space station is going across their path, not vice versa, they were there first, what is China going to say about an EMP that's indiscriminate? So, just from a legal common sense standpoint, it makes no sense. And you're talking about customary law. Is this if it destroys a U.S. satellite that's a U.S. object? Of course, that can be considered a direct attack, which would require or permit self-defense measures. And we also have liability and damages under the conventions. Whatever they damage in space, they have to pay for.
Yeah, well, good luck enforcing that. Yeah, we can't even enforce our own judgments in our own courts against our own people. But anyway, Jerry.
Yeah.
What are your deep thoughts here?
No, so I think Brad Michelle came up with some really good points, and kind of where I'm at is, if the laws are great if people respect them and if people honor them and people abide by them, but I think with Russia it's a wild card. I think in some cases, I'll call it it's a bully and they're upset and they want to take their ball and go home, and it doesn't really matter what if everybody's playing on the basketball court. So I think there's definitely some of that that's going on there, but to Brad's point, it's like, look, there's bullies across the world here, and so we've got to be prepared to do that. The governments are doing many different things to make sure that they're prepared, or they're looking at many different things to make sure that prepared. And I know from industry and others, we're doing the same thing to try and say, okay, well, if this really happens, what does that mean, or what does it not mean, or what does that mean for our future as we're doing improvements to our own services? What does that mean for us? So there's a lot of wild cards you have to take into place. I think for now, most people, it's just like, well, we've got the basic structure in place, but if people aren't going to respect that, you still have to kind of prepare for that worst case scenario as well.
Yeah, always plan for hope for the best, but plan for the worst, because as we used to say in the military, hope is not a plan. And speaking of the military, as a former airman, I do have to say the Space Force was created in December of 2019 after I retired from active duty. And it's actually still small enough that it does not, unlike the Marine Corps, which falls under the Department of the Navy, space.
No. Be careful here, because as a Marine, it's be careful what we say here now.
No, I was going to say we don't have our own Jet Corps. The Space Force does not have its own JAG Corps yet. And one of the briefings I heard this weekend was, well, they're just not big enough. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. I think you really need a cadre of space lawyers that knows what they're talking about, not just 2 that we send every year to get a Master of Laws degree in space law. But maybe Michelle can fill that gap with her center down there at Ole Miss, and the group that she's bringing up as air and space lawyers. So very good. Well, I'll close this one out. I mean, this is a little bit sensational, but this idea of an electric magnetic pulse is something that people almost like we don't understand in general how important space is. We also don't understand or fully appreciate how devastating an EMP could be in space, whether on the ground. I don't know if you guys saw, but just was it last week or the week before, NASA reported a solar flare. I was like, holy shnikes, like, do people know how bad that is? Yeah. Solar flare? So maybe it's a good thing they don't. We do have a question from the audience or a comment. Let me see here. Great question. So Clark Thomas is saying, Michelle mentioned a future shift of industrial manufacturing to the moon. How does the panel envision the proper application of national export control regulations to the lunar industrial activities? Wow, that's a law school exam. I think Michelle's going to put that question on one of her finals.
And that's a loss of one of my former students, and who knows that export controls are not my strong point. So Clark, if you're hearing this, you caught my weakness. But no, I mean, and I think Clark would agree. We're a long way from actually being able to move the industry off of Earth. We are going to have to see changes in our export controls. We're seeing it already with the Artemis Accords. Countries are bucking against or trying to do work, and we're not permitting them to do so. Our export control regime in the United States needs a complete overhaul. I think the intent is very important, but we really need to sort of think about how we're going to implement and protect, because we have done a pretty good job of almost ruining industries like our remote sensing industry in the past.
Well, Clark has a lot more comments and questions. I'm going to defer to you guys to take that offline, or better yet, Clark, come to our Law Tech Connect workshop at AUVSI Exponential on Monday, April 22nd, because Dr. Hanlon is going to be on a panel about space and spectrum in the context of autonomous vehicles. And I guarantee this is going to come up. So hope you can join us there. Lots of interesting issues, to be sure. And frankly, going back to Jerry's earlier comment, since we both live and work quite a bit in the drone space, the FAA hasn't even figured out beyond visual line of sight regulations. And you're talking about, hey, how do we adopt the Outer Space Treaty for export controls, for this lunar economy? This is your future, buddy. Like, you've got a future in policy and regulation. So keep those thoughts coming, and the government needs you, and of course the government is always here to help. Okay, last but not least, we have Brad's article. So this is about, we talk a lot about the hardware, right? We're talking about Odysseus and that lunar lander. We talk about satellites and the future of satellites, but guess what? None of this works without software. And it's kind of like software is the unspoken hero when you think about space. And Brad, your company and is thinking about these ground stations in a different way. So tell us a little bit about your article and basically the implications of it.
Well, the article is, I kind of wish I would have picked one relevant from the news in the last 2 weeks. That's why I brought up Victus Nox. So it ties to this article, though. So this article is really about, we have this term GSaaS, or ground station as a service, right? But really, in the software world, that's primarily infrastructure as a service. There's not a lot of tying it together under one umbrella, right? So if you want to use the infrastructure of Amazon, you can go ahead and use that, and you have to stitch it together. You have to write an exceptional amount of code to make it all tie together and work. Ground software as a service is just the term that we want to put the software in ground station, right? We want to make it ubiquitous and easier to use, which is what we're doing, which is one of the reasons why we were chosen for this Victus Nox, because first, you have a collection of all these ground stations across the globe for direct to Earth. And in the future, it will become not just direct to Earth, but inter-satellite links. But eventually that data needs to make it to a central point on Earth for the customer to ingest or send data up. And
Brad,
so
I have a question for you. Just from a kind of a visual standpoint, when we think of ground stations, that probably most of us, our minds go to a big NASA ops command center, right? Like when you think of a drone, like the GCS or the ground control station could literally be something that looks like a computer, gaming, handheld console. When you're talking about this infrastructure, this ground control station, what are we talking about in scope and scale from an infrastructure standpoint?
So even just at its most basic, one antenna talking to space, there's a whole rack of equipment that has to be employed. I mean, it's at a minimum for LEO satellites, low Earth orbit or GEO. Just the antenna alone is going to cost anywhere from 250,000 to, you can spend 10, 11 million, depending on the size of the antenna. But on average, you might be talking, 250,000 to 750,000 for the antenna alone. And then you have all the different hardware that has to go in to take that radio frequency and turn it into information. So that's another at least $150,000 on the ground side. So that's the infrastructure, that's the hardware. But then you need to actually make that accessible and the data from that hardware usable by the end user. And those antennas are all over the globe, that same set of hardware. And it could be different hardware. It could be different antenna manufacturers. It could be different modems. It could be different providers. The government, our government, the US government, and indeed Europe, problem. They have all this legacy hardware. They have all these antennas, but none of them work together under one cohesive platform. And that's really what GSaaS, ground software, is about, is tying that under one platform so that customers can access any antennas. We're a reseller of Amazon ground station. We have a great partnership and resell Viasat's antennas as well. Our CEO used to work at Viasat running the real-time Earth over there, John Williams. And so those partnerships, and then being able to put it under one pane of glass, one access point, so that you have more options to talk to your satellite. Now that's today with direct to Earth, satellite to ground. But in the future, again, it will be inter-satellite links, and data will come down at different points on the globe, but you still need to have that data backhaul and data management once the data hits the ground. So that's where software comes in, to archive, to backup, to analyze the data, and to create insights about what the communication looks like between space and ground. Someone mentioned space, a solar flare. So we've looked at all the metrics that we have historically and correlated it with NOAA's, they release information about space weather. And with direct to Earth satellites, with LEO satellites, we haven't seen any disruption yet to date associated with those solar flares. But
Right.
those are powerful antennas. So will it disrupt lower bandwidth or different frequencies? Probably more like the IoT type communication from ground to space. Those will be disrupted more. But for direct to Earth, we're not really seeing a huge impact yet.
Got it. Okay, very, very interesting. And Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, Viasat, that's your company, is a subsidiary or affiliated with Inmarsat?
No, so Inmarsat and Viasat used to be competitors, and then Viasat, did an acquisition, and so Inmarsat is now consumed by Viasat.
Okay, I had it backwards. I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's actually been a pretty good thing for both of us. To be honest with you, is the way the organization's grown. I mean, I'm here in London today. We're still going back and forth and dealing with things, globally. And it's worked out pretty well, to be honest with you. Is like any other company, there's growing pains with anything else, but with the acquisition being able to combine the resources, especially both not with just the K-band satellite, but also with the L-band technology satellites and S-band, it's providing a very powerhouse of things that we can do globally. So it's been pretty exciting, quite frankly.
All right, awesome. And where do you see the future of kind of software to go along with this hardware? Where do you see that going?
Well, I think it's all required, right? So, everything that Brad just said, I mean, these are things that we do on a daily basis, both from coming in from the satellites, but also with the ground integration with the rest of the infrastructure, right? Being able to, if we're going to get to the point where seamless communications between LTE providers or C-band providers or any of the ground providers, we've got to put that ground infrastructure in place that kind of merges the data streams together for the users, but also the data to operate and maintain the stuff. It's not easy. For sure, but it's not unachievable. And I think it's just a matter of putting in some of the right agreements to kind of drive this that gives, at the end of the day, how do we meet the customer's needs? And, I think there's some specific industries that are going to be driving that. And those are things that are going to help us kind of push and get us to that point.
Got it. Got it. How about you, Michelle? Any thoughts on this particular piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not technical at all, so I can't speak to the efficacies and plans. But I can say, we have so much data that can be so helpful to so many people, and we don't have enough people understanding how to use that data. The UN Office of Outer Space Affairs has a program where it goes and tries to teach, developing countries that could really benefit tremendously and very impactfully and significantly from the use of satellite data, to understand how to gather it, how to analyze it, how to use it, and where to get it from, and so forth. And so, I think, every time I talk about Earth observation and the fact that these satellites are constantly up there taking pictures. We have data from Landsat back in the 70s, right, that we can compare things to. And so anytime I hear that we're making the practice of gathering data and distributing data more efficient, I just clap.
Yeah, so I guess back to Brad and or Jerry on that point, I imagine that a lot of that hardware is proprietary. So, from an end user standpoint or an owner standpoint, it's either going to be the government, and they may or may not want to share the data coming to or from those particular assets. Or you'll have a private company like Amazon. I think you mentioned, Brad, in your talk, in your comments. So proprietary. So how do you break through stovepipes? Do you see, I don't think there's a requirement right now to kind of share this information. Stitching it together or having that ability, where do you see this being the most maybe effective from a sharing standpoint, I guess?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest fields going forward is not necessarily the hardware, even though that's, let me make a point about why it's important to have a software layer between the hardware, because as the hardware improves and the communication capabilities between hardware systems and the standards improve, then we can leverage that and take advantage of it without changing anything for the end user.
Got it.
So there's going to be a lot of improvement on the hardware side and the standard side, and that's great going forward. Well, I lost track about what my first point was going to be, but your question was about data sharing. Yes. So there's the information we collect from the hardware has nothing to do with the data on board from the spacecraft. The information from the hardware just tells us about the quality of signals to and from space, and that's informative. Now, when you talk about the hardware that they're actually bringing down, like Earth observing data, the Earth observing data, and communication data, SAR, etc., that information is where I think the most wealth will be created, and that is indeed why companies are willing to take a risk on doing something so difficult as putting a satellite in space and taking all that risk. I mean, let's face it, there's not a lot of space companies that are successful at generating profit. It's just it's not there yet. So the data is the driver for why we're doing that and why companies are willing to take that risk. Google just invested in, I believe they started a nonprofit for methane detection, right? And they're doing that because of the data, right? They want to improve the earth. If we can get, I think there will be more fusion companies in the future, and we're going to get more data clearinghouses in the future, where you can go and get information from any one of these sources, and then someone will have a vision for fusing that data together and making new insights. And really, if I'm being honest, that's where the value is in the next 20 years of space. There's a lot of ancillary value, but the driver is that data.
Yeah, you know what? It's all about the data. I don't care what technology you're using. It's always about the data. Jerry, would you agree?
No, it is. It is always about the data, but I am going to correct you on one thing, though. So there is, unfortunately, it's not U.S. law, but in European law, they recognize the aspect that data is king. And so for certain markets, and I'm going to go back to like the drone markets, there they do have laws in place that require communications provider to share information. There is no law like that in the U.S., right?
Well, no, I would say there is, Jerry, actually. And they fall, and I think Michelle would agree, they fall under this consumer privacy protection. So it's weird, but they're protecting data and could be impacting tech industries indirectly by having this interface with any kind of technology that's gathering data, whether it's from a drone, whether it's on the internet, and special protections that apply, including the right to dispute that data and have them take it down.
Yeah. So what I say from a commercialization, like things that are considered PII or that fit into that realm, I think that's absolutely true. What I'm talking about is more about data. I think that myself and Brad are focused on is really about your communications infrastructure, what you learn about your communications infrastructure, how it operates, the statistics and things like that. These are things that are key. And if you, like, for example, if you apply to the drone industry, before somebody's willing to approve a flight plan, they want to make sure that you have a communications infrastructure that is going to be available and has capacity to do what you want to do, right?
Yeah.
And so from a U.S. perspective, I don't believe those laws exist. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I usually keep pretty well up on those. But I know in Europe, they do have that law in place. But I mean, this is where I think the data really is going to be king as we start to evolve and as we start to grow about this. Data is available. How people use it, I think people still trying to figure out, as Michelle points out, is in some cases not a matter of do we have the data? We have the data. It's one, you need to access the data? And the thing is, be careful what you ask for, because in many cases, what we've learned is people ask for, well, give me your data, and then I'll look at it, and then I'll try and figure out what to do with it. That doesn't really work either, right? We've got to come up with some context here to kind of help drive this and move it forward.
Yeah, and then there's AI, which was last month's show. So if you guys missed that, go check that out, because AI is the thing that everybody's overlaying on top of that data to sort through and figure out, what's the value add here. So lots of interesting topics. By the way, everybody, we are like 2 minutes out. I'm going to give a quick around the horn opportunity for all of our guests to say just a couple closing comments. And then just remind everybody that next month in March, we're dedicating this show to the theme of robotics. So join us on the crew next month. It'll be a great one. So without further ado, let's go ahead. We'll start with Michelle this time. Any final thoughts as we close out the show, Michelle?
Well, I'm thrilled to see the topics of your shows, AI, robotics, and space all go hand in hand. So I just really want to say, if you are listening, go out and tell your friends about space and how important it is to fund space exploration.
Amen. All right, Jerry.
Yeah, I would say it's been great. I've been following some of your shows for a while, especially around AI and stuff like that. I think it's very applicable to the future, and hopefully we can, figure out how to do a lot of this responsibility, drive future regulations to make us all happy as we move forward.
Well, awesome. And once again, Michelle will be joining us at Law Tech Connect, as will Jerry and his colleague, Lisa B., who's involved heavily in ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and global drone regulations. So some great panels there. And Viasat is sponsoring the Dawn of Autonomy podcast, the month of July, Global Leaders. So we're thankful to them. Look forward to working with Viasat in the future. And Brad, last but not least.
Yeah, this was a great call. It's very interesting. Some new points. I'm used to being on a panel with a lot of tech people, so this was refreshing hearing about some of the other aspects that I'm not usually exposed to. And so thank you all, and please reach out if anybody has any questions about how to make space more ubiquitous or space access communication more ubiquitous, and new technologies that I'm not aware of. Thank you.
Now, is your team going to be at the Space Symposium coming up in April in Colorado Springs?
Yes, we have a number of people on space going to space. 5 people going to Space Symposium. We'll also be at the SAT show in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. And I just ran into your group also at the Air and Space Force Association's Warfare Symposium a couple weeks back in Denver. So looking forward to connecting with your team again. So that's all she wrote, everybody. We are at time. We are out here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Don. I appreciate it.